You get $15, Dad? That was my son's final offer. His voice was heavy with the satisfaction of a man about to inherit his mother's $160 million fortune. He wanted me in the front row at the reading of the will just to witness his victory. He wanted to see my face the moment my complete and absolute insignificance was legally recorded. What he did not know was that my ex-wife, even after death, still had one final play prepared, and I was the centerpiece. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me know in the comments where you are listening to this story from. And make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people are the ones with the most devastating plans. The sound of the planer was my symphony. For the last 5 years, it had been the soundtrack of my life. Every high-pitched screech was a note. Every shaving of walnut wood was a verse. There in my small workshop on the outskirts of a quiet Midwestern town, I was no longer a failed architect. I was not a discarded husband. I was just a carpenter, a man who created solid and honest things out of broken pieces. My hands were calloused and scarred from years of work. They knew the truth of the wood. Wood never lies. It does not cheat. It simply is, with all its knots and imperfections. I respected that. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil was the only cologne I wore. I was working on a rocking chair, feeling the smooth curve of the armrest take shape under my guidance. It was a calm, quiet existence. And then that piece shattered. My old flip phone, resting on the cluttered workbench, began to vibrate. Its buzz was a harsh and annoying intrusion. I slammed the planer off, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. I wiped my hands on my dusty jeans and walked over to the phone. On the small screen, 2 words stared back at me cold and strange. Daniel Miller. 20 years. That was how long it had been. 20 years without a single call. That was not a demand or an insult. No Christmas cards, no birthday wishes. Just a huge, empty silence built brick by brick with accusations and contempt. I had assumed that silence would last until one of us was 6 feet under. I suppose I was not entirely wrong. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of sawdust. I flipped the phone open. My voice came out raspy from lack of use. Hello? The voice on the other end was sharp and cutting. It belonged to a world a million miles away from my workshop. It was the voice of downtown Chicago traffic and $1,000 suits. Daniel. He did not call me Dad anymore, not for a long time. I was David, a name he pronounced like it was a minor annoyance, like lint on his perfectly pressed jacket. Your mother is dead. There was no sadness in his voice, no trace of grief. He dropped the sentence with the emotional detachment of a news anchor reading a teleprompter. Last week. A stroke. It was quick. I stood there motionless, looking out the workshop window at the sunny yard. A strange feeling of numbness covered me completely. Sarah. Dead. The words did not fit. She had always been a force of nature, a hurricane of ambition and creativity, brilliant and beautiful and absolutely destructive. To think of her simply as dead felt wrong, almost offensive. Daniel grew impatient with my silence. Did you hear me? The funeral? I started to ask with a dry throat. He cut me off without mercy. It is done. You were not on the list. Listen, I am calling you for this. Her lawyer requires your presence. Reading of the will. It is this Friday at 10 in the morning sharp. Offices of Harrison and Fields in the city. Do not be late. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. An order dictated from on high by a son who had long ago crowned himself king of a world I no longer belonged to. Finally, I found my voice, forcing it to stay steady. I have no reason to be there, Daniel. Sarah and I made everything clear 20 years ago in that courtroom. I have nothing that is hers, and she has nothing that is mine. A sound pierced the line, a brief, ugly laugh. It was an empty laugh without humor. A noise of pure distilled contempt. That sound, more than anything else he could say, stirred something very deep inside me. Oh, I know you are not getting a dime, he spat. Do not be naive. My mother despised you, but it is a legal formality, a procedure. You have to be physically present to officially hear that you are zero, a documented and notarized confirmation of your irrelevance to this family. He paused, letting the poison sink in deep. Personally, he added, I just want to be there to see your face. I want to see that fake, quiet dignity of yours break when they read it out loud. It is the only kind of show you are still capable of giving. The humiliation was so raw, so direct, that it was almost impressive. It was not the rage of a hurt son. It was the calculated cruelty of a victor who wants to rub his opponent's face in the dirt. Are you finished? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Almost, he said with a tone loaded with condescending amusement. Do not worry about the trip back. I will give you $15 for the bus. Think of it as a parting gift. And the line went dead. Click. I stood there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening none to the dead tone. The silence of the workshop flooded back in, but it was not the same. It was heavy, suffocating. The anger was an old emotion I had buried under years of sawdust and resignation, but it started to burn again. It was not a raging fire. It was a red-hot ember buried very deep, starting to glow. Daniel had not invited me to a will reading. He had summoned me to a public execution. My execution. He wanted a show. Fine, he would get one. I closed the phone and placed it on the table with deliberate care. I went back to the half-finished rocking chair and slid my hand along its smooth, honest curve. Then I turned and walked out of the workshop toward the small house attached to it. I went to the closet, pushing aside the flannel shirts and worn jeans that were my daily uniform. In the back, covered by a thin layer of dust, hung a garment bag. I had not touched it in 20 years. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside hung my only suit, charcoal gray, the same one I had worn the day my old life ended. I would wear it again for the beginning of my son's life. On Friday morning, the taxi ride from the airport to downtown felt like crossing into another dimension. The warm, dusty streets of my town were a distant memory, replaced by the canyons of glass and steel of the financial district. I paid the fare. The price hurt more than I expected. I stepped onto the sidewalk. The air here was colder, sharper. The Harrison and Fields building was exactly what you would imagine. It did not just occupy the corner. It dominated it. A vertical wall of dark glass and polished granite. I pushed through the revolving doors, and the noise of the city was cut off, instantly replaced by a deep, irreverent silence. The lobby was a cathedral, dedicated to the worship of money. The floors were acres of white marble, so polished I could see the distorted reflection of the ceiling lights far above. The walls, paneled in dark, shiny mahogany, smelled vaguely of lemon oil and old wealth. I had spent my whole life designing buildings, but I had never designed a space like this. It was not built for people. It was built to intimidate, to remind anyone who walked through its doors how small they were. And I felt small. I was wearing my only suit, the charcoal gray. The fabric was good wool, the kind you can hardly find anymore. But it was 20 years old. The cut was too loose, the shoulders too padded. It was clean. I had ironed it myself until the crease in the trousers was as sharp as a knife. But it was still old. It was the suit I had worn to the divorce trial, the last time I'd seen Sarah face to face, the last time I saw her look at me with anything other than cold disappointment, fueled by the lies our son whispered in her ear. I could still smell a faint trace of mothballs, that strange smell of preservation and decay. As I walked toward the reception desk, the soles of my old leather shoes made a lonely click-clack sound on the marble. That echo seemed too loud, ridiculously out of place in that tomb-like silence. Some young lawyers, men and women in their 30s with suits that cost more than my truck, looked up from their phones. Their eyes did not linger. They scanned me, catalogued me, and discarded me in a single fluid motion. Not a client, not a threat. Just an old man, an anomaly. I felt like a grease stain on a pristine white canvas, a drop of ink spreading on a contract. I did not belonged there. And I knew it. That was precisely the point. This was Daniel's first move, summoning me to his territory, to this fortress of power, while I wore the armor of my greatest defeat. I reached the reception desk, a slab of marble that looked like it had been ripped from a mountain. Behind it was a young blonde woman with a headset so discreet it looked like part of her body. "How can I help you?" Her voice was polite, but her eyes were bored. "I have a meeting at 10. I said, my voice raspy like unsanded wood. "Reading of the will of Sarah Miller. My name is David Miller." Her eyes flickered. The last name Miller rang a bell, but the face did not fit. She was surely expecting someone who looked like Daniel, someone who belonged to this world, not me. A fleeting flash of confusion and then disdain crossed her face before the professional mask snapped back into place. "Of course," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take a seat. They will come for you shortly." She pointed toward a waiting area with low black leather sofas arranged around a massive glass table. I sat on the edge of one. The leather was cold and stiff. I clasped my hands together, my rough carpenter hands against the worn fabric of the old suit. I looked at the abstract art on the walls. It meant nothing to me, just color and shape to fill a space. I was a ghost, a remnant of a past that everyone there had decided to bury. I was sitting there waiting to be told, officially and legally, that I was worth nothing, exactly as my son had promised. The anger from that phone call, that burning ember, glowed a little brighter. I was not there to be humiliated. I was there to finish something. They did not just walk into the waiting room. They made an entrance. It was Daniel, and he did not come alone. He moved with an unearned confidence, the arrogance of a man who has never been told no. He was wearing a navy blue designer suit, probably Tom Ford, that likely cost more than I earned in 6 months. It fit him perfectly, highlighting a figure maintained by personal trainers, not hard work. His hair was slicked back. A gold and steel watch shone on his wrist. He wore an expression of bored entitlement. Behind him came his accessories. The first was a young woman, exaggeratedly thin and strikingly beautiful in a severe artificial way. She was squeezed into a very expensive dress and held a designer handbag like it was a life preserver. Later I would learn her name was Jessica. She was absorbed in her phone, her thumb moving nonstop across the screen. The second was a man in his 40s, with a tan that was impossible for October and teeth too white to be real. He had the fixed, predatory smile of a shark. It had to be Charles, the financial advisor. They were not a grieving family. They were a pack of predators circling what they believed was their prey. Daniel planted himself before the reception desk without even looking at me. "Daniel Miller," he announced, his voice resonating in the large space. "Mr. Harrison is expecting me." The receptionist, who had barely given me a glance, transformed into efficiency and smiles. "Yes, Mr. Miller. Right away, Mr. Miller. Please take a seat." Then he turned ready to claim one of the sofas, and finally his eyes found me. He stopped. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, the smile of a cat that has just cornered a mouse. He walked toward me, his expensive shoes silent on the marble. His 2 companions followed him, curious. "I cannot believe it," he said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "You actually came?" He looked me up and down, stopping at my old suit, at the worn collar of my shirt. "I guess you really need those $15, huh, Jessica?" The young woman looked up from her phone for the first time and let out a high-pitched, shrill giggle like breaking glass. Charles's shark smile widened. He observed me not as a person, but as an old piece of furniture, something to be removed and thrown away. He did not even deign to offer his hand, just made a cold clinical assessment. Daniel pointed in my direction, speaking to his 2 companions. This he said, and the pause itself was an insult, is my father. He pronounced the word father as if it were a shameful secret, an unfortunate biological fact he was forced to acknowledge. It was an apology. He was apologizing to them for my existence, for my worn suit, for my old shoes, for not being someone who reflected his supposed brilliance. I remembered him at 10 years old one Christmas morning. I had spent weeks in my workshop, the old one, building a detailed model of a battleship by hand. I felt proud. Daniel opened the box, looked at it for a second, and threw it aside. "It is not brand name," he complained. "I want what my friends have." Sarah, always ready to fix any problem with money, appeared immediately with an expensive video game console. She had created this monster whim by whim, buying his affection because earning it was too much work. The man in front of me was not a man. He was a collection of desires wrapped in a $10,000 suit. I said nothing. I simply looked at him. I held his arrogant, haughty gaze. I did not blink. I did not defend myself. My silence seemed to make him more uncomfortable than any angry response. He expected a reaction, pleading, rage, humiliation, anything that would confirm his power over me. I gave him nothing. I just sat there, a ghost in a gray suit, watching the show he so desperately wanted to star in. His smile tightened. He was not having as much fun as he had planned anymore. He turned to Charles. "So the first thing we do is liquidate the real estate portfolio in." He was interrupted by the sound of a heavy oak door opening. A man stood in the frame, and the atmosphere of the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The show was about to begin. The lawyer looked to be about 60, tall in an impeccable gray suit that conveyed quiet authority, not ostentation. That was Mr. Harrison. He had the face of a judge, impassive and hard to read, with eyes that did not just look at you, they evaluated you, weighed you, and filed you away. The quiet confidence radiating from him dispelled any murmurs. Even Daniel seemed to shrink a little. His gaze swept the room, passing over Daniel and his entourage, as if they were part of the furniture, and then it landed on me. He paused for a moment, and I saw a slight flicker in his expression. It was not pity. It was something closer to understanding. He walked toward me. "Mr. Miller," he said with a respectful voice, "thank you for coming." He did not offer his hand, but his words were a handshake in themselves, a simple acknowledgement of my presence, of my right to be there. Only then did he turn to my son. "Mr. Miller," he repeated. The same last name, but the tone was different, colder, formal, without any warmth. The difference was so subtle that an ordinary man might not have noticed, but Daniel's entire world was sustained by a fragile scaffolding of preferential treatment and status. The fact that I, the pariah, had been acknowledged first was a direct challenge to his authority. I saw a look of annoyance in his eyes, a tension in his jaw. He tried to cover it with a wave of dismissive arrogance. "Let's get this over with, Harrison," he snapped impatiently. "I have a reservation at the Grill to celebrate. I do not intend to be late." The lawyer did not change his expression. He simply nodded once. "As you say," he replied, opening the door to the boardroom. "This way, gentlemen." The boardroom was as cold and imposing as the lobby, with an added layer of finality. A single massive table of dark polished mahogany occupied the center of the room, so shiny it looked like a pool of black water. One entire wall was covered by floor-to-ceiling windows, but they did not offer a view of the sky, just the gray facade of the skyscraper across the street. It was a room designed to execute contracts and crush opponents. Daniel naturally took the seat at the end, the one furthest from the door, the one that marked the head of the family. He leaned back, spreading his arms, owning the space. Jessica and Charles sat on either side, like a queen and bishop protecting their king. I took a chair near the door, a footnote. I was there to fill a gap, a legal requirement. I put my calloused hands on the table in brutal contrast to the perfect surface of the mahogany. Mr. Harrison stood at the head. He did not sit down immediately. He placed a thick document bound in leather on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The air seemed to get thinner. He pulled out his chair, sat down calmly and with calculated slowness, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and took out a pair of simple gold-rimmed glasses. He put them on with precise movements without rushing. He was completely in command. He opened the folder. The pages were thick, cream-colored. He cleared his throat. This, he began with a voice that filled the room, is the last will and testament of Sarah Miller, of date August 4th of this year. I, Sarah Miller. Even from the grave she continued to mark her territory. She had taken my last name in marriage, but she built her empire with her maiden name before forcing me out. Miller, a name turned into a brand. A name that, according to my son, was worth $160 million. Harrison's voice became monotone, the perfect instrument for a legal document. Being of sound mind and body, I declare that this is my last will, revoking any previous ones. Daniel let out a loud sigh and looked at his expensive watch, already bored. First, Harrison continued, I order that all my legitimate debts and funeral expenses be paid from my estate. He turned the page. Second, I leave the sum of $50,000 tax free to my housekeeper, Mrs. Emily Gonzalez, in gratitude for her 25 years of loyal service and her infinite patience. I saw Daniel roll his eyes. He muttered something to Charles that I did not catch, but the word crumbs was unmistakable. I, however, smiled a little inside. Emily, I remembered her. She was with Sarah even before the money got really big. A kind, quiet woman who always had a hot cup of coffee for me in the kitchen after one of my spectacular arguments with Sarah. She had seen it all. She deserved every penny. It was a glimpse of the woman I had known. Sarah could be generous. She just chose her moments very well. Third, he continued reading. I leave the sum of $100,000 to the Fund for the Protection of the Monarch Butterfly. This time it was Jessica who reacted. She let out an incredulous giggle. Butterflies, she whispered to Daniel loud enough for me to hear. Is she serious? I felt a sharp prick in my chest. Not of sadness, but of something more complex. Nostalgia. Before Daniel was born, before Miller, Designs was an empire. Sarah and I had driven an old Jeep down to Mexico. We slept in cheap motels and hiked miles up the mountains to see the monarch butterfly sanctuaries. I remembered her standing in a clearing, the air so full of orange and black wings that it looked like a dream, with her face to the sky and tears slipping down her cheeks. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, David, she whispered to me then. It is like all the souls in the world are coming home. She had remembered, after all the bitterness, all the lawyers. After years of silence, she had still remembered that day. That was not just a bequest. It was a message. Fourth, Harrison read, I leave the sum of $25,000 to my driver, Michael Rodriguez, for his excellent service and for never having commented on the colorful guests my son brought home. Daniel sat up straight. What the hell does that mean? Charles put a hand on his arm. Nothing, Daniel. Just a joke. It does not matter. But he was visibly upset. This was not following his script. He was supposed to be the star, and the opening act was taking too much attention. He started tapping the table with his fingers, an impatient tap, tap, tap that echoed in the room. Harrison ignored him and continued, Fifth, I leave my collection of first editions of modernist poetry to the National Library, with the exception of one volume, a 1922 edition of The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which goes to. Daniel slammed his hand against the table. The sound was like a gunshot. Harrison stopped reading. He did not look surprised or angry. He simply stopped. Very slowly he raised his head. He took off his glasses with a deliberation that was more threatening than any shout. He folded them. He placed them on the table and looked at my son. Mr. Miller, he said, and his voice left behind, the monotone becoming a sharp, precise instrument. This is not a negotiation. It is not a business meeting. It is the legal proclamation of the final wishes of a deceased woman. I am going to read every word of this document, exactly as your mother wrote them. And you, he paused briefly, you are going to sit there, and you are going to listen. Is that clear? Daniel's face turned a dark, ugly red. He had been challenged, reprimanded like a child. He opened his mouth, then he closed it. He looked at Charles, who shook his head. He was trapped. Harrison held his gaze a second longer and, satisfied, put his glasses back on. He picked up the document, smoothed the page calmly, and took a small sip of water. He had made my son wait. He had regained control. "Very well," he said, resuming the neutral tone. "Let us continue. Fifth, as I was saying, I leave my copy of The Wasteland. Ah?" He stopped. I swore I saw a slight smile at the corner of his lips. "Ah, no. That clause has been crossed out. Let us move to the next one. Sixth, regarding the personal associates of my son." Harrison's voice barely changed, but it was like flipping a switch. "We move now," he said to Article 6, regarding the personal associates of my son Daniel Miller. I saw Charles straighten in his chair. His shark smile put its mask back in place. He smoothed the lapel of his suit, adopting a more dignified posture, ready to receive the reward he expected for managing Daniel's fortune. Jessica finally put down her phone, eyes lit up with greedy expectation. To my financial advisor, Harrison read Mr. Charles Vance. He pronounced the title with slight irony, almost as if putting it in quotation marks. "I leave the sum of $5,000. Charles's smile froze. 5,000. The figure floated in the air ridiculously small. An insult. Less than the cost of his suit. I saw his knuckles turn white, clutching the edge of the table. Daniel looked at him annoyed, as if Charles's disappointment was a personal offense. But Harrison had not finished. "I leave this sum," he continued, "with the legally binding recommendation that he use it to enroll in a course on professional ethics. My own financial records show that he is in dire need of a refresher in that subject." The shark smile disappeared, replaced by a mask of pale, stunned fury. Charles turned his head toward Daniel, eyes wide. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice vibrating with rage. He had been called a thief in front of everyone, and Harrison continued without flinching, moving his gaze to the young woman beside him. "To my son's current companion, Jessica," he read. "I leave the high-quality imitation handbag with which she attempted to replace my authentic Birkin in my closet last month. If Charles was struck by lightning, Jessica was reduced to ashes. Her perfectly made-up face stained a blotchy red. Her jaw dropped. She had not only been insulted, she had been unmasked as a vulgar thief in front of the man she was trying to trap the lawyer. And me, the ghost, she had not even considered worthy of a greeting. The crazy old witch!" she shrieked, her voice pitched high and broken. "She lies! I never—" "Shut up!" Daniel roared, his voice bouncing off the mahogany walls. He was not defending her. He was silencing her. His well-constructed image was cracking. His entourage was being dismantled piece by the words of a dead woman. He was furious not because they had been humiliated, but because this was making the moment too long, too dirty. It was not part of his victory celebration. "It does not matter," he growled at both of them. "It does not matter. It is a joke? Who cares about a handbag? Who cares about $5,000? He turned his gaze in flame back to the lawyer. "Move on, Harrison. Stop wasting time with this trash and get to my part." I remained motionless, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt a connection with Sarah. That was the woman I had married. Not the victim our son described, but a brilliant, cold, and lethally precise woman. She was not just distributing an inheritance. She was settling scores one by one. She was burning the accessories of Daniel's life, leaving him isolated with nothing but his own greed. She was clearing the table before the main course. Harrison, completely unperturbed, waited for the shouting to die down. He looked at Daniel with an inscrutable expression. "As I have already indicated, Mr. Miller," he said, "I will read every word. Now, if you will allow me." He let the silence settle for a moment longer. Then he turned the page. The air tightened. This was the moment. After sweeping away the trash, the main event arrived. "Article 7, he said, to my son Daniel Miller." Daniel leaned forward. His breathing was shallow. His knuckles were white on the table. He had forgotten his humiliated companions. All his attention, all his greed, was focused on the lawyer's mouth. "I leave the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Daniel let out a long sigh of relief, a full exhale. Color returned to his face. He turned to Charles and then to me with a triumphant smile. The penthouse, the jewel in the crown, was his, and my complete collection of watches. Patek Philippe. Harrison continued. Daniel's smile broke into a laugh. That is right, he laughed. Now we are talking. Did you hear, old man? The Pateks. All of them. Harrison raised a finger, cutting the celebration short. However, he added, and the word hung like a blade, the watch collection is located in a high-security safe inside the penthouse. The only key to that safe, he paused. He looked down at the document, and then raised his eyes. He looked at me across the long mahogany table. I have entrusted to his father, David Miller. The silence that followed was absolute. So deep I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Jessica and Charles, still digesting their own humiliations, turned their heads in unison toward me. Daniel simply stared at me. His face, flushed with victory a moment ago, turned pale. The smile dissolved. What? His voice was an incredulous whisper. What did you just say? The key, Mr. Miller, Harrison repeated, was entrusted to your father. Daniel slammed the table with both hands and stood up his chair, scraping violently. What are you talking about? Is this a joke? A sick joke? He pointed at me with a trembling finger. He has not seen her in 20 years. He does not even know where she lived. He is a nobody. All eyes were on me, and I was just as surprised as he was. I looked at the lawyer, my mind reeling. A key. Sarah had given me a key? What did that mean? Was it another one of her games? Another way to twist the knife, even from the grave? I did not have any key. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was the ghost in the gray suit, and suddenly I had been put center stage. Daniel was shouting. His face was a mask of rage and bewilderment, but in reality I was no longer in that cold room. The sound of the thick pages sliding against each other dragged me back through 20 years of silence to another kind of crisis. I was no longer in Chicago. I was in our old house in a wealthy suburb. It was 2005. It was 3 a.m, and the house was dark, except for the light on in Sarah's study. I found her there, not crying. It was worse. She was sitting motionless, staring at a wall full of spreadsheets. Her face pale, completely empty. She was broken. Miller Designs, the company that was her life, her passion, her entire identity, was bleeding out. It was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. She had overreached, investing millions in a luxury resort in the Caribbean. She had trusted the wrong partners. The whole project had been built on fake permits and sand. And now it was all falling down. The banks demanded immediate payment. Her investors threatened to sue her into oblivion. She was facing not just bankruptcy, but disgrace. I sat next to her in that dark study with the light of the monitor, casting ghostly shadows on her face. "It is over, David," she whispered hollowly. "Everything I built. It is over. They are going to take the house. They are going to take everything." She was not afraid of being poor. We had been poor before. What terrified her was failing, being considered an idiot. Her world rested on the reputation of a brilliant, infallible woman. And now that reputation was about to be executed in public. She looked at me, and her eyes, always full of fire and ambition, were empty. "They are talking about criminal negligence," she stammered. "They say that I cheated." I looked at the woman who was my wife, the mother of my son, the brilliant, irritating, passionate woman I had loved. I knew she was drowning, and she was about to drag us all down with her. The next week the house was a tomb. The phones did not stop. Calls from furious bankers and betrayed investors. Sarah let them ring. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She stayed for hours in the study, watching the numbers turn into a red sea. She was paralyzed. And then a week into that hell, a hand reached out. It did not come from a bank. It did not come from a friend. It came from an encrypted email routed through a server in the Arab Emirates. It was a meeting offer from a private equity group based in Dubai that I had never heard of. They said they had been following Miller Designs for a time, that they saw potential. Sarah was too sunken to go. too paranoid to even speak on the phone. She was a ghost. She begged me to go. I was still her husband, her life partner, even if I was not in the business. I was the architect. I knew the construction side of her empire better than anyone. So I went. I met them in a hotel boardroom near the airport, so depersonalized it felt like an operating room. There were 3 of them. They were not bankers. They were young, impeccably dressed in identical dark suits, and they had the cold eyes of men who have seen too much. They were extremely polite, the kind of politeness that feels more threatening than an insult. They put the conditions on the table. On the surface, it was a miracle. Brutally simple. They would inject $100 million into Miller Designs immediately. Enough to stabilize the Caribbean project, pay the banks, and silence the lawsuits. A total salvation. I froze. And in exchange, I asked cautiously. The lead negotiator, with a slight British accent, slid a leather folder toward me. "We are investors, Mr. Miller," he said. "We only want to invest in future projects. We believe in the Miller brand. We want to help you build." I took that folder home. It weighed like lead. Sarah, desperate for a spark of hope, ripped it from my hands. For 10 minutes it was pure euphoria. She laughed, she cried, she hugged the pages. "We are saved, David. We are saved." But I was reading the fine print. I was an architect. I had spent my life reading contracts, blueprints, addendums, and that was not a rescue. It was a blueprint for committing a crime. "Sarah," I said, cutting her celebration short, "look at this." I pointed to the addendum, the projections for future projects, a series of luxury towers. "Look at these numbers," I told her. "They are wrong, very wrong. The costs are inflated by at least 40%. At first she did not understand. She was still blinded by those 100 million of salvation. "So what?" she said, dismissing it. "If they want to overpay, that is their problem." "No," I answered, feeling a chill run down my back. "That is the point. It is not an investment. It is a laundry machine." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "They give us 100 million in clean capital now," I explained. "They save the company. We pay banks' lawsuits. In exchange, we build their projects. But we do not bill them the actual cost. We bill them 140 million. We pay those extra 40 to their shell companies in the Cayman Islands or wherever. We take their dirty money and make it look like legitimate construction payments. They use your name as detergent." The color disappeared from her face at last. "No," she whispered. "I am not going to do it." "Then we declare bankruptcy," I said, unvarnished. "It is over." "No," she screamed. The word came out of her throat shredded. She got up, pacing back and forth in the study like a caged animal, hands tangled in her hair. "I cannot. You do not understand, David." She grabbed my shirt nails, digging into my chest. "If we go bankrupt, they investigate us. They will do a forensic audit. They will find everything about the Caribbean. They will say I was negligent, that I committed fraud." Her eyes were wild. "It is better than this," I pleaded. "This is organized crime. These are people you do not want to owe favors to." "I do not care," she sobbed, and she collapsed. She did not faint. She crumbled onto the Persian rug without strength. She was no longer a CEO. She was not an empire builder. She was just a terrified, cornered woman. "David, please," she cried. Her voice choked. "I cannot go to jail. I cannot." Her whole body shook. "And Daniel?" She choked up. "What about Daniel? He is at one of the best universities at the top. Do you want him to be the son of a convict? Of a ruined failure? He will die of shame. He will hate me. He will hate us both. Please, there has to be another way." She was hysterical. She was right. She was trapped. If she rejected the deal, they would destroy her for fraud. If she accepted it, they would destroy her for laundering. She had built her own prison. I watched her fall apart, this brilliant, impossible woman who had built an empire from nothing and who sometimes was so blinded by her ambition that she did not see the cliff until she was already falling. I looked at the contracts on the desk, the blueprints of the fictitious towers. I was an architect. I knew how those deals were built. I knew how to hide costs, how to create paper companies for supplies and labor. I could see a path, a single, terrible, and dangerous path, to do what they wanted, but keep her name clean. David, please, she repeated. What are we going to do? I looked at the mother of my son, and I made the decision that was going to define the rest of my life, the decision that would save her company, and in doing so, destroy me. I lifted her off the floor and held her by the shoulders. Enough, I told her with a calm I did not feel. Stop crying. Go to your room. Go to sleep. She looked at me, confused. What? You are not going to participate in this, I said firmly. You are not going to sign these papers. You will not go to these meetings. You will not appear in these emails. You are going to dedicate yourself to design, to saving the public face of the company. You will do what you do best. A spark of hope tiny appeared in her red eyes. And the deal? And the money? And the contracts? I took the leather folder. I looked at the signature page, the one that bore her name as president of Miller Designs. Leave it to me, I said. I became a ghost. While Sarah went back to being the visible face, attending galas, and choosing fabrics, I slipped into the shadows. I became the middleman. I was the one who flew to Zurich, to Dubai, to the Caymans. I sat in sterile rooms negotiating with men with no last names. In the U.S., I used my architect license, my name, my reputation to create a series of shell companies. Miller Construction, Miller Projects, Miller Architectural Supplies. I built a labyrinth of legal entities, a firewall designed with a single purpose, that the dirt never reached Sarah. The $100 million arrived. Miller Designs was saved. The banks were paid. The lawsuits disappeared. The financial papers celebrated her as a visionary who had weathered the storm. And then part two began. The laundering. I signed the inflated contracts. I approved the transfers to anonymous accounts. I supervised the creation of fake invoices, certifying that millions of dollars in Italian marble or German steel had been received when in reality only a bank receipt arrived. And I was good at it, dangerously good. My architect's mind used to solid structures was equally effective building hollow structures. For 2 years I lived a double life. Respected architect by day, high-level money launderer by night. I saved her company. I saved her name. I saved her from jail. But you cannot move that much dirty money without someone noticing the smell. The day they arrived, they did not come for Sarah. They did not even know she was implicated. They came for me. They had been following the Dubai group for years. They saw the money flow into my companies. They saw the inflated contracts. They saw the fraudulent invoices. They saw my name, my signature, my architect's stamp on documents that were pure fiction. They did not kick down the door. It was quiet. 2 men in dark suits in my office on an average morning. They put the file on the table. They had the transfers, the photos of my meetings at the airport, everything. They offered me a deal. Tell us who you work with. Mr. Miller, said the lead agent. Give us the organization. Give us the names. I looked at the file, my name on every page. Sarah's did not appear. I had done my job too well. I had a choice. I could rat her out. Tell the whole story. How she was terrified, how she begged me, how I did it to save her and our son. Maybe there would be leniency. Maybe they would have understood, or I could take it all. I thought of Sarah crumbled on the carpet. I thought of Daniel at his elite university, with a bright future living off an empire that was now technically stained by criminals. And I made the second decision, the one that sealed my fate. I do not know what you are talking about, I told them. I got into debt. I made bad deals. I manipulated my accounts. There was no organization. It was just me. I got desperate. I gave them a confession, but not the one they wanted. I admitted to professional negligence, tax, evasion, falsification of records. I played the role of the dumb, greedy architect who got in over his head. To free Sarah from a money laundering conviction, I had to assume some crime. So I did. I did not go to prison. My lawyers paid with the already clean money from Miller Designs avoided that. But I lost everything. I lost my license. Revoked permanently, I lost my reputation. My name appeared in the papers, the disgraced architect. I became a pariah, and that was where Daniel twisted the knife. He was 22, freshly back from college. He saw his chance. He went to his mother not to comfort her, but to poison her. He betrayed you, he shouted. He used your company. He diverted money behind your back. He is a criminal. He humiliated you. He humiliated me. It served him the easy narrative. In his version, I was not the savior, but the villain. And Sarah, seeing her company safe, her name clean, while mine burned, took the simplest path. She chose the story that made her a victim. She filed for divorce. She declared herself the deceived party, the trusting wife betrayed by her greedy husband. And she let Daniel, our son, believe it. She let the whole world believe it. She never said a word in my defense. She just let me burn. That was the price of saving her. Harrison's voice, calm and steady, ripped me from that memory. I blinked. The dark study of 2005 faded, and the shiny mahogany table returned. My heart was beating hard. I looked around. Everyone was still looking at me. Charles had an expression of greedy calculation. Jessica, for the first time, looked at me as if she really wanted to know who I was. And Daniel looked at me with an almost terrifying intensity. His face turned into a storm of suspicion and rage. The veins in his neck stood out. "The key!" he spat. "Where is it? What did she give you?" He was convinced it was all a plot, a final cruel joke of his mother's with me as an accomplice. He saw conspiracies in every shadow. I looked at him. I looked at the lawyer, searching for an answer neither of them had. My mind was blank. 20 years of a simple life among wood shavings and solitude did not fit with the image of a key hidden somewhere. It was absurd, like a line from someone else's script. I shook my head not with rebellion, but with genuine bewilderment. "I do not know what you are talking about," I said, and it was the absolute truth. My "I don't know" floated naked and honest. Daniel looked at me, his expression passing from disbelief to rabid contempt. He processed the new variable, the impossible complication. He was a bull stunned by a prod, but only for a second. He let out a forced, hollow laugh, a desperate attempt to maintain control. "It does not matter," he snorted with a dismissive gesture. "A key? Do you think I care about a key? Do you think I am going to go on a treasure hunt with him?" He laughed louder. "I will call a locksmith. We will crack that safe before lunch. It is irrelevant, a sentimental little game of a dying old woman." He dropped back into the chair, but he was not relaxed. He was tense as a coiled spring. He pointed at the lawyer with a trembling finger. "Enough little games," he spat. "Enough servants, butterflies, and keys. Get to the important part, Harrison. The assets, the 160 million. Read the part where everything passes to my name. Read it now." Harrison watched him over his glasses. He showed neither fear nor irritation. He let the arrogant order dissolve on its own in the heavy silence. Then, with that methodical calm so typical of him, he adjusted his glasses, took a sip of water, and turned the page. The sound of the thick paper was like thunder in the tense room. It was the sound of a judge reaching the final verdict. "Of course," he said, "we will proceed to Article 8 regarding the disposition of the main estate, the remainder of all assets, real estate, and furniture, wherever they may be found." This was the moment. The air was so thick it was hard to breathe. Daniel leaned so far forward he almost fell out of his chair. Even Charles and Jessica, despite their humiliations, listened with desperate attention. It was the instant that in their heads would justify everything else. Regarding all remaining liquid assets, stocks, bonds, properties, and the controlling share in Miller Designs, Inc., Harrison read. He stopped. He paused as if rereading a complex and unexpected clause. He was savoring the moment. He was a scene stealer. "Come on," Daniel whispered like a hiss. "Come on." Harrison cleared his throat. "I disposed the following. First, to my ex-husband, David Miller." I snapped my head up. To me, what was she doing? Something like a stifled gasp was heard coming from Daniel's chest. He had inhaled so hard it sounded like a punch. His face, which expected to hear only his name, tightened. His eyes became two slits of pure hatred locked on me. He did not breathe. He waited. He was a bomb about to explode. I imagined the cruel ending, a small sum for me, a few ridiculous thousands, just to humiliate him before gifting him the rest. To my ex-husband, David Miller. Harrison continued imperturbable. I leave the sum of $15. $15. The words hung suspended. It was not an insult. It was a public execution. It was a joke. Mean and almost childish. But Harrison had not finished yet. $15 to be paid in cash, he read. This is to cover the cost of the bus trip back to wherever he came from. A trip that my son Daniel, without a doubt, will have the kindness to suggest to him. First, a snort was heard, a kind of stifled laugh. Then the dam broke. A huge, wild laugh erupted from Daniel's chest. It was not a laugh of humor. It was a sound of malignant triumph, so pure it made the air turn nauseating. He jumped up his body, shaking with laughter. He pointed at me with his finger eyes full of tears of cruel joy. $15, he roared, and the words bounced off the walls. 15! He doubled over the table, pounding it with his palm. My God, $15. Charles, who was in humiliated silence, caught the new current and jumped on it. He smiled again, servile. Incredible, Daniel. Simply incredible. Jessica let out a shrill laugh. $15 for the bus. Oh, Daniel. She was hilarious, wasn't she? Daniel, between guffaws, straightened up, wiping away a tear. He was an actor, and finally he had his scene. She always had a twisted sense of humor, he said, swollen with victory. Always. He had won. In his mind, the game was over. The insults to his friends were appetizers. The little key a meaningless whim. That was the punchline. It had been settled before the law that he was the victor. And I officially was less than nothing. A $15 joke. His laughter faded until it became a satisfied murmur. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit, a gesture of absolute control regained. He approached me, circling the table like a predator, circling its prey. He stopped a few steps from me. He looked me over slowly with a contempt that could almost be touched. Well, that is it, old man, he said with a voice loaded with fake pity. You heard it. $15. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out a crocodile skin wallet, and opened it slowly, theatrically. You know what? He murmured with a tone of poisoned complicity. 15 is a bit insulting. He pulled out a $20 bill and let it fall in front of me. The bill skidded on the mahogany and stopped right at my hands. Here is 20. Do not say I never gave you anything. He stood looking at me, waiting. He wanted an outburst, a scream, a tear for me to take the money. I did nothing. I looked at the bill. I looked at his triumphant face. And I waited. I did not feel humiliated or sad. I only felt a strange anticipation because I knew Sarah. And I was looking at Mr. Harrison. He did not move. He remained at the head with a neutral face, hands on the document. He was letting the scene burn itself out. That was not the end. It was the intermission. My immobility, my refusal to react, enraged Daniel more than any outburst. His smile broke a little. What is wrong, old man? He spat. Cat got your tongue? Whatever. This is done. It is all mine. Finally. You can leave now. Go back to your shed full of sawdust or the hole you crawled out of, and do not forget your bus money. He turned around, a final gesture of contempt. He returned to his chair, patting Charles on the back. Well, the grill awaits us. We have a lot of champagne to drink. He grabbed his jacket, ready to go start his new life. Mr. Miller. The voice cut the air like ice. It was not loud, but it had a core of steel. It stopped everyone. It stopped Daniel with his jacket half on and one foot already toward the door. He turned slowly. His face, which still had remnants of the smile, hardened. What? Mr. Harrison was still sitting. He had not moved an inch. He looked at him, and his expression was no longer neutral. It was cold. Sit down, he said. Daniel's smile did not just fade, it was erased, dissolved. The blood drained from his face. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I said," repeated Harrison in a dangerously low tone. "Sit down. I have not finished reading." "Finish? What are you talking about?" stammered Daniel. "You already read it. The $15. The joke. It is over." Harrison, with the calm of a magician pulling the last card, leaned toward the briefcase beside him. He did not touch the thick leather folder. He took out a second folder thinner of yellowish cardboard, sealed with a thick circle of red wax. It looked important. This, he said, tapping on the large folder, was the conclusion of the original will. Then he placed the new folder on the table. "This," he added, "is a codicil, a legally binding addendum." He looked directly at Daniel. "It was signed, witnessed, and notarized 3 weeks ago, 1 week before your mother's stroke." In its main clause, his gaze shifted for an instant toward me. It states explicitly that it replaces all previous articles regarding the disposition of the main estate. Daniel did not sit. He collapsed. His body fell onto the chair as if his strings had been cut. His face was white. The red splotches from the recent laughter looked like burns. Charles and Jessica were rigid. They looked at the sealed document as if it were a bomb. The lawyer broke the seal with a small knife. He unfolded the sheet inside, attached to other, thicker documents. He put on his glasses. "This," he said, "is a letter from your mother, addressed to you, Daniel, with the legal instruction that it be read aloud here together with the new wording of Article 8. He began to read. It was no longer his voice. It was Sarah's pure words. "To my son Daniel," he read, "I write this because I am finally tired of being a coward. For 20 years I have allowed you to believe a lie that I invented, that I fed, and that I allowed to destroy a good man, your father." "What?" whispered Daniel. It sounded like tearing paper. "The story you grew up with," continued Harrison, "the story of your criminal and cheating father who betrayed me and stole from the company, is a complete fabrication. It is exactly the opposite of the truth." "No," shouted Daniel suddenly. It was a strangled shriek. He lunged over the table, eyes wild. She was sick. She was senile. "That is not from her. This is fake. He pointed at me. He manipulated her. This is a scam." He turned to Charles, desperate. "Charles, tell them this is inadmissible. She was not in her right mind. We will contest everything. We will destroy it." Harrison, bored, raised his hand to stop him. He lifted one of the attached documents. On that point, he said, "Attached to this codicil is a 40-page report, a complete psychiatric and cognitive evaluation performed by a panel of 3 independent neurologists and psychiatrists. It was conducted at her request 72 hours before signing this document." He looked Daniel in the eye. "In their expert, unanimous, and legally binding opinion, your mother was," he read, "totally lucid, in full command of her faculties, and possessing mental acuity superior to 99% of people her age." He let the report drop onto the table. "She was not crazy, Mr. Miller. She was, as it says here, tired of being silent." He returned to the letter. Daniel sank back down, emitting small, choked sounds. "The truth, Daniel, is this," he continued reading. 20 years ago, Miller Designs was on the verge of catastrophic collapse. I had made a series of terrible and reckless decisions. I had overreached. I trusted the wrong people. I was facing not only bankruptcy, but criminal charges for fraud and negligence. I was going to lose everything. The house, the company, my name. I was going to go to prison. I closed my eyes. I saw the study again, the rug, her tears. We were presented with a way out, read Harrison. A deal with a group of shady investors. A deal that would save the company, but that forced us to launder their money through our operations. I was trapped. If I said no, I went to jail for fraud. If I said yes, I went to jail for laundering. I was a coward. I crumbled. I was ready to let the world burn with me. And then your father intervened. A whimper was heard, a small, broken noise. It came from Daniel, shaking his hands over his ears, as if he could block the words. Your father, Red Harrison, the man you have called a criminal for 20 years, made the decision to protect me, to protect you. He accepted the deal. He put his own name, his own career, his own license on the line of fire. He created the shell companies. He did the dark meetings. He managed the transfers. He did the dirty work, so that my name, the Miller name, would stay clean. The lawyer's voice was a hammer. He diverted all the risk onto himself. He built a legal firewall around me and stayed inside the flames. And when the authorities finally came knocking, they came for him because that was exactly what he had prepared. He confessed, Daniel. He confessed to crimes he had not committed, negligence, fraud, to cover the true crime, the laundering for which I was responsible. He lost his license, he lost his reputation, he lost his entire career. He did it to save me, to save the company that you now claim so arrogantly as yours. The voice lowered in tone. And what did I do in return, Red Harrison? I listened to your poison. You told me he was a criminal, that he had humiliated us. And I, out of shame and cowardice, nodded. I let that be the story. I divorced him. I abandoned him. And I allowed you, our son, to treat him like trash. Because I was terrified that if one day you knew the truth, you would look at me with the same contempt with which you looked at your father. My hands were shaking. I clasped my fingers tightly. I felt the hot sting of tears that were too old. It was not sadness. It was something like having your spine given back to you all at once. I was a coward. Daniel continued the letter, and I let you turn me into an excuse. I let you become an empty, greedy, and arrogant man who mocks the only person who sacrificed everything so that you could have this life. The 160 million fortune that you were so anxious to claim exists for one single reason, because your father, David Miller, saved it. The silence was absolute. The room had become an uncomfortable temple. Daniel, who was shouting before, was no longer moving. He did not cover his ears. He looked at the table. Without seeing, he was seeing 20 years of his life crumble. Your father, Red Harrison, with a firm voice, is not a criminal. He is not a failure. He is a hero. The kind of man who makes sacrifices so deep, so complete, that people like you and me can barely comprehend them. He burned his own life to keep us warm. I swallowed hard, and I, Sarah, finished. Allowed you to treat him like trash. I encouraged you to do it. I used your contempt for him as a shield to avoid facing my own guilt. Every time you called him a failed old man, it was one more brick in the wall I built, so as not to see that the weak one, the traitor, the one who failed this family, was me. Daniel stopped, shaking his head. He remained motionless. His expensive suit now hung on him. He looked like a child who has just discovered that the monster was not where he thought. The lawyer looked up. The fortune of 160 million this empire you expected to inherit, he said, putting the letter aside, exists in its entirety because of Mr. Miller's sacrifice. He took off his glasses. And now, he announced, we arrive at the final disposition. The room was no longer a simple boardroom. It was a court, a confessional, and a grave. Daniel was a shell collapsed in his expensive chair. Charles and Jessica were annulled, reduced to collateral damage. Your mother's words continued. Harrison serve as a moral and legal preamble to this final article. It replaces everything previous. This is Article 8, definitive. He cleared his throat once more and read, therefore, having exposed the unvarnished truth and attempting to compensate to the extent that money can do, so a betrayal that can never be undone. He paused. He looked at everyone. The clock on the wall seemed louder. I dispose as my last will and testament. He said that all my assets, furniture and real estate, wherever they may be found, all my stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, my art collection, my private goods, and above all, the 100% controlling interest in Miller Designs, Inc., an inheritance whose current value is estimated at $160 million. He read the list as if handing down a sentence. It was not a prize. It was a weight, an empire, a burden. Daniel did not move, did not breathe. He was a statue of ash. All this continued. Harrison and I leave a sign and transfer. He stopped. He looked up. He did not look at Daniel. He did not look at Charles or Jessica. His eyes, clear behind the lenses, swept the table and stopped on me. He held my gaze. In that suspended second, I felt my whole life hanging in the balance. My workshop, my silence, my years among wood. I was not thinking about money. I was not thinking about winning. I was thinking, "What have you done, Sarah?" The lawyer returned to the text. To my ex-husband, David Miller. The words did not fall. They floated unreal. Me, the man in the suit from 20 years ago. The man who had arrived there to be executed in public. I heard a small stifled sob. Daniel. But I could not look at him. I could not move. I felt as if someone had removed the roof of the building, and the full weight of the city sky was crushing my shoulders. 160 million. Miller Designs. It was not a gift. It was a sentence. It was the way to force me back into the world I had escaped from. My heart beat slow and heavy. The lawyer, with a professionalism I almost appreciated, did not let the moment drag on too long. He knew the important thing was not the figure, but the why. I leave this inheritance, he read with a crisp voice, not as a gift, but as a payment. As a late and insufficient compensation for the career I allowed to be destroyed, for the honor I allowed to be stolen, and for the family that, out of cowardice, I allowed to be broken. And there I understood. It was not about the money. It never had been. It was her confession signed and sealed, her apology, her way of giving me back my name. She was not just handing me the company. She was declaring before the law and the world that it had been mine from the start, that I was the one who had saved it. I looked at my hands, rough stained by years of varnish and dust. They were hands that built. And now I owned an empire I never wanted. The fortune was a shackle. But something else small and metallic shone on the other side of the table. One piece was still missing. The lawyer closed the main document, and finally he said, "We arrive at the bequest for your son." He looked at Daniel. Hearing his name, a minimal spark appeared in his empty eyes. It was not hope. It was pure instinct, the fear of being left with absolutely nothing. He raised his head with effort. Red, hollow eyes fixed on the lawyer. "To my son Daniel," read Harrison, "who has already received throughout his life more fortune than he deserves, both in the money he spent without restraint and in the sacrifices he never acknowledged. I leave nothing but one thing." He stopped. He looked down at the sheet. Then he looked at the man collapsed in front of him. "I leave him exactly what he so generously and publicly offered his father." I felt my breath catch. Daniel looked at me confused, then looked at the lawyer. He did not understand. His head was too fragmented. "No," he stammered. "What?" The lawyer did not answer with words. He opened a drawer in his table. He took out a paper. "I am authorized by the estate," he explained, "to issue this in accordance with your mother's provisions." He held up the paper for a second. Then he placed it on the table. He slid it gently toward Daniel. The check slid until it stopped in front of him. $15, he said. His voice was flat, definitive. "This is your inheritance, Mr. Miller, for the bus fare, just as your mother arranged." Charles made no sound. He stood up slowly. He placed the chair in its place. He did not look at me. He did not look at Daniel. He gathered his briefcase and left with quick, silent steps. Evaporated. Jessica, on the other hand, did speak. She looked at the check. She looked at Daniel's destroyed face, and her expression went from shock to something else. Pure disgust. That repulsion of a predator before prey that it discovers is sick. The man she had stuck to like a barnacle, the one who brought bags and dinners, had been left with nothing. He was the $15 man. "You are," she spat, with a low, poisonous voice. "Pathetic." She got up, grabbed her authentic bag, and left without looking back. The click-clack of her heels was the only sound for a moment. And then there were three. The check, Daniel, and me. The paper with the 15.00 written on it was on the table, shiny under the light. Daniel stared at it fixedly. His breathing shallow stopped. 5 full seconds without moving, not a blink, and then he exploded. It was not a word. It was a primal scream, a roar so full of rage it felt physical. It was the howl of a man who has not only lost everything, but discovers all at once that he himself was nothing. No! His arms swept the table. Glasses, folders, the water pitcher. Everything went flying. Glass shattered against the wall. "I will sue you!" he shrieked with a broken voice, spitting. "I will sue everyone. She was crazy. She was senile. I'm going to prove it. I will burn it all down." He spun around clumsy, out of control, with a crazed look, and then he saw me. All his rage, all his humiliation, all his pain concentrated on a single point. Me. "You," he bellowed. "You did this. You poisoned her. You manipulated her. Thief!" He lunged at me. He did not walk. He threw himself. The chair fell backward. His hands were clawed, aiming straight for my throat. I did not have time to get up. I simply braced for the impact. But Harrison was faster. He pressed a black button on the table. Before Daniel could round the table, the door burst open. 2 security guards filled the frame. They were not mall cops. They were closets and suits. They grabbed him one by each arm, spun him around, and immobilized his hands behind his back with brutal efficiency. "Let me go!" he shrieked between rage and panic. "Get your hands off me!" He thrashed, but he was like an insect against a hydraulic press. The lawyer stood up at last. He observed the destroyed room, observed Daniel held down and crying. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Take him away," he ordered coldly. "You cannot do this to me," Daniel screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "I am Daniel Miller. This building is mine. I will fire you." "And Mr. Miller," added Harrison just as they were taking him out. Daniel turned his head, eyes still crazed. "Do not forget your inheritance." He pointed to the $15 check still on the table amidst broken glass. Something broke definitively in my son. He started cursing everyone. The lawyer, his dead mother, but above all me. "I am going to kill you, old man. Do you hear me? I am going to kill you." His screams died down at the end of the hall. The heavy door closed. The silence that filled the room after was dense. Only my breathing was audible, and far away, a siren. The adrenaline evaporated, leaving me exhausted, drained in a way that reached the bone. 20 years of tiredness fell at once. I sank into the chair. The old suit weighed like wet armor. Only 2 remained, the man who now had everything and the man who had read the verdict. I looked at the chaos on the table, the overturned chair, the glass, the $20 bill Daniel had thrown at me next to the $15 check. I looked at the lawyer. He was gathering papers calmly, as if none of that had happened. A question remained suspended. The loose end? "The key," I said with a raspy voice. "The watches. Why did she do that? Why drag me into that?" It was cruel. Harrison stopped organizing documents. He looked up. For the first time all day, a genuine smile, faint and sad, appeared at the corner of his lips. "That was your wife's final test for your son," he answered. "A test." "A test?" "That he failed with honors," he said, shaking his head. "She wanted to see if, even for an instant, he would be capable of humbling himself and asking you for something. To see if there was any salvageable piece left in him." He leaned a little forward, and also he added, "It was a message for you." He reached into the same pocket where he kept his glasses. He took out something small. It was not a folder or a seal. It was a key. A brass key, old like a door key. He slid it across the table. The key jingled as it stopped in front of me. "This one," he said. "It is the key she left you. It was never the watches. That was just staging." I looked at it. "Then what is it for?" "It is the key to the penthouse," he explained. "But the safe your son will have opened contains no watches. He will only find empty cases." "Another final joke, I suppose? Then what does this key really open?" The lawyer held my gaze. "There's another safe," he said, "built into the wall behind a painting in her private study. This key opens it. Inside is the original file from 2005. Everything. The transfers the shell company documents you signed, and above all the letters and emails where she begged you to do it." I felt my heart stop for a second. She kept everything. He continued softly. "She kept the complete truth for 20 years. This codicil is her confession, but the box is the proof. She wanted you to be the one to find it. She wanted you to be the one to decide whether to make it public or not. The money was her apology. But this he pointed to the key as her way of giving you back your name." I reached out, my rough fingers closed around the cold metal. The 160 million was a weight, a new kind of captivity. But that key, that little key, was freedom. This whole experience left me with a brutally clear lesson. I learned that truth has a weight and a patience of its own. For 20 years, a lie poisoned a whole family. It turned a son into a relentless judge of the father who in secret had saved his life and future. But a lie built on silence and shame cannot last forever. Sarah's final confession showed me that no matter how deep you bury it, the truth always ends up forcing its way to the surface. I also understood that true honor has nothing to do with reputation or what people say about you, but with the silent, unapplauded sacrifices you make for those you love, even when they will never know them, or worse, blame you for them. In the end, a name cleared by the truth is an inheritance, far more valuable than any fortune of $160 million. And now I ask you, if you had been in my place with that key in your hand and that weight of 160 million on your shoulders, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments.